Imagine getting your dream home, only to have a self-appointed HOA queen tell you can't move in without her personal approval. Sounds insane, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And today, I'm exposing everything. This isn't just annoying. This might actually be harassment. Let me show you how far she went. Just pulled into the driveway of my new home, excited, relieved, and honestly a little overwhelmed. After months of planning, paperwork, and packing, it finally felt real. This was supposed to be a fresh start. The movers were behind me. The truck was loaded with everything I owned, and I was ready to start settling into the house I had worked so hard for. But before I could even take the first box inside, I saw her. A woman in her late 50s, arms crossed, sunglasses on even though it was cloudy. She was standing on the sidewalk, staring. No smile, no wave, just that intense look. I gave her a polite nod, thinking maybe she was just curious, or maybe even trying to be neighborly in her own way. I figured I'd probably meet a lot of people that day. That wasn't what happened. Instead of introducing herself or saying, "Welcome to the neighborhood," she walked straight up to me like she owned the place. No hello, no name. The first thing out of her mouth was, "You're not allowed to move in yet." Just like that. No context, no explanation. I literally thought she was joking. I laughed a little, thinking maybe this was some weird HOA initiation or neighborhood humor I didn't understand yet. But her face didn't change. She repeated it, more firm this time, like she was scolding a child. "You cannot move in without board approval." I was confused. I'd already signed all the documents. The sale had closed, the title had transferred, and I had the keys in my hand. The real estate agent never mentioned anything about a delay. I asked her what she meant. "I own this property now," I said. "There's nothing pending." She shook her head and said, "That doesn't matter. You still need HOA clearance before you're allowed to move in. That's the rule." Then she pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper from a manila folder like she had rehearsed this conversation. It wasn't an official document, more like a list of bullet points printed from Word. No signatures, no dates, nothing with legal weight. But she acted like it was the Constitution. I asked if she was part of the HOA board. She smiled a little and said, "I'm not on the board, but I'm very involved." Whatever that meant. Then she said something that threw me off completely. "We have a process here, and you didn't follow it. You should have contacted me before finalizing your move-in date." That's when it clicked. She wasn't talking about the HOA process. She was talking about her process. She had decided she was the gatekeeper of this entire community, and everyone had to go through her for approval. The movers were starting to unload boxes, and I could see them looking over awkwardly. She actually turned to one of them and said, "Stop, you're not authorized to bring anything in yet." Like she had some kind of authority. The guy just looked at me like, "Is this real?" I had to assure him it was fine, and to keep going. I tried to keep calm, and asked her where, in the HOA rules, it said I couldn't move in. She dodged the question and said, "Well, it's always been understood. Everyone knows that." I told her I'd read the HOA bylaws and CC&Rs before purchasing, and there was nothing in there about needing permission to occupy the home once ownership is transferred. She rolled her eyes and said, "You should have asked me before doing anything. That's just how it works here." It was clear she believed that being involved meant she had some kind of veto power over my life. The tension kept building. She wasn't just annoying. She was trying to assert control in a situation that had nothing to do with her. It was passive-aggressive at first, but quickly became confrontational. She began nitpicking things too. "Your car is parked too close to the curb. That box shouldn't be on the grass. You should really be using approved moving trucks." It was non-stop. I hadn't even been there 30 minutes, and I already felt unwelcome. Not by the community, but by her. She made it clear she wasn't just another neighbor. She saw herself as some kind of authority figure, a self-appointed enforcer of rules that didn't even exist. That first interaction told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a one-time comment or a friendly warning. It was control. It was entitlement. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Because when someone like her gets away with that kind of behavior, they don't stop. They double down. And that's exactly what she did. After that awkward and honestly bizarre first encounter, I hoped it would just blow over. Maybe she had a bad day. Maybe she misunderstood something. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, thinking she'd calm down once she realized I had every legal right to be there. But I was wrong. Completely wrong. The next morning I was outside organizing a few boxes in the garage when I saw her again. Same expression, same crossed arms. She walked right up the driveway like she lived there and asked, "So, did you speak to the HOA yet?" There was no good morning, no introduction, no casual neighborly conversation. Just straight into it, like this was an interrogation. I told her again, politely, that I didn't need to speak to anyone. I had closed on the house, paid the dues, and submitted all required documents through the escrow process. I'd done everything correctly and legally. But that wasn't enough for her. She responded with, "Well, you haven't been approved to move in. That's a requirement in this community." Then she started listing off things she claimed were standard policy. According to her, I needed written approval from the board confirming my move-in date, and until I got that, I technically wasn't authorized to occupy the home. She even said, and I remember this exactly, "You're technically trespassing until the board acknowledges you." That's when I realized she wasn't just nosy or difficult. She was trying to intimidate me. She knew she didn't have any real power, so she was creating her own version of the rules and hoping I wouldn't push back. I asked her to show me where it said that in the HOA guidelines. She didn't have anything official. Again, just that same printed sheet of reminders she had typed up herself. At the top, it said something like community conduct expectations, and it was full of vague demands like must respect authority of community leadership and prior approval needed for disruptive events such as move-ins. Disruptive events? Moving into your own home? She clearly wanted me to believe she was some kind of appointed authority, even though she admitted she wasn't even on the HOA board. I asked her directly, "Do you have any actual position in the HOA?" Her response? "I've been here 17 years. I've worked closely with every board member we've had. People know to come to me." That was her answer. Not a title, not an official role, just longevity and a reputation she had built as the neighborhood watchdog. She then dropped another line that stuck with me. "I've stopped 3 move-ins before yours. I know how this works." That was it. She saw herself as a gatekeeper. In her mind, it didn't matter what the bylaws said or what the legal documents stated. If she didn't approve, it wasn't happening. It was surreal. This woman was so determined to enforce rules she made up that she was now bragging about blocking people from moving into their own homes. I couldn't believe it. And the more I questioned her, the more aggressive she got. She started claiming I had skipped steps in the process. She said I should have filled out a move-in notice form and submitted it to her directly. Again, not to the board or the management company, but to her. I told her I'd never heard of that form, and she said, "It's not online. You have to get it from me." That's when it clicked. She was creating her own fake approval system, a system where she controlled the paperwork, she approved the timeline, and she decided whether or not you were ready to live there. It had nothing to do with the HOA's actual structure. She was just counting on people not knowing their rights. I had spoken to the management company during the closing process. They confirmed that once the property closed, and as long as dues were current, the homeowner could take possession immediately. No move-in approval needed. No special forms. Nothing like what Karen was demanding, But she didn't care. She kept insisting that the board backs me up on this, even though she couldn't name a single person currently on the board who had given her that authority. I asked for their names, and she changed the subject. She said, "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Most people just follow the rules and keep the peace." That line hit me hard. It was manipulation disguised as diplomacy. She was trying to guilt me into compliance. She wanted me to feel like I was the problem just because I wasn't falling in line with her made-up system. I realized then that this wasn't about the HOA. It wasn't about community order or even her being a concerned neighbor. It was about control. She had gotten used to running things her way, and anyone who didn't obey was treated like an intruder. And the craziest part? She was so confident in her fake authority that she truly believed she could stop me from living in my own home. She wasn't asking. She was demanding. That's when I knew I had to take action. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a power trip, and it was only getting worse. After that second confrontation, I sat down at my kitchen table, still surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and realized something. If I didn't educate myself, I'd always be playing defense against people like her. Karen wasn't going away, and if she was this bold now, I could only imagine what she'd try next. So I decided to get clarity, not just for myself, but so I could finally call out her lies with facts. I pulled out every HOA document I had, the bylaws, the CC&Rs, the welcome packet, even the boring fine print no one usually reads. I highlighted everything related to moving in, homeowner rights, and board authority. I wasn't just looking for what I was allowed to do, I was specifically searching for what they were allowed to demand, and guess what? Nowhere, and I mean absolutely nowhere, did it say I needed approval from anyone to move into my own property. No mention of a move-in form, no required board meeting, no clearance needed. The only references to move-ins were related to notifying the HOA office for things like trash bin scheduling and gate access, which had already been handled through escrow. So when Karen said I couldn't move in without board approval, she was making that up completely. It wasn't an interpretation or misunderstanding. It was a lie, plain and simple. To double-check, I called the HOA's management company. Not the board, not Karen. The actual professional agency that handles the legal and administrative duties. I explained what happened and asked if I'd missed anything. The woman on the phone chuckled and said, "No, that's not how it works. Once ownership is legally transferred and you've paid your dues, you're entitled to full use of the property, including moving in." She even confirmed something important. The HOA board cannot block an owner from taking possession of their property. They can enforce rules after someone moves in, like parking restrictions or noise complaints, but they can't delay or prevent occupancy unless there's a court order or legal violation. And clearly I had neither. Then I asked a more specific question. What if someone in the community says I need to get their personal approval before I can move in? The rep didn't hesitate. "That would be harassment," she said. "If it continues, document everything and report it to us." There it was. Harassment. Not just annoying, not just overstepping. Harassment. I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't being dramatic. Karen's behavior wasn't just controlling. It could be legally considered an attempt to interfere with my property rights. And that's a serious line to cross. I also learned that HOA board members, even the actual elected ones, not self-appointed involved neighbors, have very limited authority when it comes to things like occupancy. They can enforce community guidelines, sure, but they're not the police. They can't change legal terms, override ownership, or stop you from using your own home. Their power is tied to the rules already written in the governing documents, and even those are subject to state law. That gave me so much clarity, and honestly, confidence. Because now I knew I wasn't just reacting emotionally, I was standing on solid ground. I wasn't causing drama or being difficult. I was protecting my rights as a homeowner. And let's talk about those rights for a second because people, like Karen, prey on ignorance. Most new homeowners, especially first-timers, don't realize just how protected they are. When you legally own a property, you have the right to occupy it, enjoy it, and use it within reason. As long as you're not breaking any actual laws or rules outlined in writing, no one, not even a board, can prevent you from moving in. Even if the HOA wanted to change the rules, they'd need to vote on it, amend the bylaws, and notify all members. And that process takes months. They can't just make up new requirements overnight because someone like Karen feels uncomfortable with change. I also discovered something else that made her actions even more disturbing. There have been lawsuits across the country where HOA, board members, or overly aggressive residents tried to use community standards as a way to block people from moving in, often with discriminatory motives. In many of those cases, courts ruled in favor of the homeowner, stating that interference with occupancy is a violation of both contract law and sometimes civil rights law. Now, I'm not saying Karen had a hidden agenda, but the fact that she tried to deny me access to my own home based on rules that didn't exist, that's a slippery slope. And if she's done it before, like she claimed, then it's part of a pattern, and that's even more serious, so I made a decision. From that point on, every time she said something that felt wrong or made up, I was going to ask for it in writing. Not her personal notes. Official documentation. If she couldn't produce it, then I had my answer. She was bluffing. Because the truth is, people like her thrive when others stay quiet. They rely on confusion and intimidation. But once you arm yourself with facts, once you really know your rights, they lose their power. And Karen? She didn't like that one bit. After learning the legal truth about my rights, I thought things would finally settle down. I expected Karen would realize she'd crossed a line and back off. I had hoped that standing firm, armed with actual facts, would be enough to shut down the drama. But no, she didn't stop. She escalated. In her mind, she wasn't wrong. She was just being ignored. And that made her even more determined to prove she had authority. Her tone changed from passive-aggressive to outright confrontational. She wasn't just making demands anymore. She was monitoring me, watching, documenting, trying to catch me breaking some invisible rule. It started small, little things that seemed annoying but harmless. I'd find notes on my door, unsigned, of course, with vague warnings like, "This isn't how we do things here," or "You're setting a bad precedent." Sometimes she'd write them on sticky notes. One time it was a printed sheet of suggestions on how to be a respectful resident. None of these notes came from the HOA or had any official letterhead. It was clearly just her, trying to intimidate me with passive pressure. Then she started showing up more. Anytime I was outside, moving boxes, sweeping the porch, setting up furniture, she'd walk by slowly, pretending to be on a phone call, but talking loud enough so I could hear her saying things like, "Some people just move in without permission. No respect for the process." She wasn't talking to me, but she was definitely talking at me. She made comments about my guests. "Are they on the approved list? Did you register them with the HOA?" Again, there's no such rule. Visitors don't need to be registered. This isn't a gated military base, but she acted like every person I invited over was violating some sacred protocol she'd invented. And then came the camera. One day, I noticed a new security camera installed on her property, aimed directly at my driveway. It was positioned in such a way that it didn't capture her front door or yard, just mine. When I looked closer, I could see it even had a motion sensor. Every time I stepped outside, it blinked red. She was monitoring me. I wasn't doing anything suspicious. I was just living my life. Taking out the trash, walking to my car, bringing in groceries. But the idea that someone was watching me constantly? That shifted everything. It stopped being about the HOA. It stopped being about rules. This was personal now. One morning, I was washing my car in the driveway, and she came over and said, "Hope you're not using too much water. We have conservation guidelines in this community." I asked her where those guidelines were published. She said, "They're understood." That was always her fallback. Understood rules, agreed upon practices, community expectations, but never anything in writing, never anything real. I realized I couldn't go outside without feeling like I was being observed, judged, or ambushed. And it wasn't just me. My friends started noticing too. One even joked, "Does that lady live in your bushes?" It would have been funny if it didn't feel so accurate. It became clear that this behavior wasn't just irritating. It was harassment. She was targeting me specifically, creating a hostile environment to make me feel unwelcome in my own home. It wasn't about community standards. It was about control, retaliation, and obsession. So I started documenting everything. Every note, every comment, every unwanted interaction. I saved the sticky notes. I took pictures of the camera angle. I even began recording audio with my phone when I was outside, just in case she approached me again. At first it felt extreme, but I knew I needed a paper trail. If things continued or escalated further, I wanted to be able to prove what was happening. I reached out to the HOA management company again and submitted a formal complaint. I included timestamps, photos, and a summary of her ongoing behavior. They were polite, but non-committal. They said they'd look into it, but warned me that since she wasn't officially on the board, their power to discipline her was limited, unless she violated a specific rule or law. That was frustrating. So someone could harass a neighbor, under the excuse of being involved, and as long as they weren't technically breaking a written HOA rule, they could skate by? I knew then that this wasn't just an HOA issue. It was a personal boundary issue, and if it continued, it might become a legal issue. So I looked into my rights as a homeowner under state law. I found out that repeated, unwanted contact, especially when it interferes with your peaceful enjoyment of your property, can fall under civil harassment. And in many places, if you can show a pattern of behavior that causes emotional distress, you have the right to file for a restraining order or take civil action. I didn't want to go that far. I still hoped she'd just stop. But I made it clear, in my final message to the HOA, if the harassment didn't end, I'd be contacting an attorney. That message must have made it back to her because for a while, things got quiet. No more notes, no more loud sidewalk commentary. The camera stayed, but the blinking stopped. Maybe she finally realized I wasn't going to be pushed around, or maybe she was just regrouping. But that stretch of silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like a pause before the next move, because people like Karen don't give up control easily. Enough was enough. After weeks of intimidation, fake rules, and constant surveillance, I knew it was time to shift from defense to offense. Karen had tried every trick: paper notes, whispered threats, scare tactics, and even a security camera, aimed straight at my home. But if there's one thing I learned through this whole experience, it's this: silence is permission. And I wasn't going to give her that anymore, so I took action. Real action. Not confrontation. Not yelling, just facts, documentation, and the law. The first thing I did was write a formal cease and desist letter. I consulted with a local attorney who specialized in HOA and harassment cases. He reviewed my documentation, all the photos, notes, timestamps, and audio I had collected, and told me I had more than enough to move forward. The letter was short, but clear. It stated that her behavior, her attempts to control my property, monitor my movements, and interfere with my right to enjoy my home, had crossed into harassment. The letter didn't just go to her mailbox. I sent copies to the HOA board and the property management company. No more letting them stay neutral. They needed to know what was happening in the community they were responsible for. I wanted it on record that someone was actively making my living situation hostile. And guess what? That changed everything. Suddenly the HOA board took things more seriously. I got a call within a week. One of the board members admitted they'd received similar complaints about Karen in the past, but no one had ever filed anything formal. That's the thing about people like her. They operate in the shadows. They're careful, calculated. They push just hard enough to intimidate, but not quite far enough to provoke legal action, until someone finally draws the line. They assured me they'd be reviewing the issue at the next board meeting. I wasn't expecting a miracle, but the tone had shifted. People were finally paying attention. Meanwhile, I continued living my life, without fear. I stopped reacting to her passive-aggressive nonsense. If she glared, I ignored it. If she made a comment, I let it fall flat. Her power was rooted in attention and control. When she didn't get either, she started to retreat. I also did something that really made a difference. I started talking to other neighbors. Up until then, I had stayed quiet. I kept to myself, hoping the drama would resolve on its own. But when I began opening up, I learned something huge. I wasn't alone. Several neighbors had their own Karen stories. One woman had been warned not to host a birthday party because events require HOA authorization. Another guy was told his work van lowered the property value and was asked to park it on the street. All from Karen. All fake rules. It wasn't just me. She had made it her mission to control the entire block through fear and intimidation. And no one had stopped her because no one had documented anything. That changed when we started comparing stories. A few of us even considered forming a neighborhood committee. Not an anti-Karen group, but a real constructive voice for actual homeowners who were tired of being bullied. People who wanted clarity, not confusion. Communication, not control. And that's when I realized something powerful. This whole ordeal wasn't just about one pushy neighbor. It was about knowing your rights, using your voice, and refusing to be intimidated by someone who builds their authority on lies. For anyone going through something similar, here's what you need to know. Document everything. If someone is crossing lines, write it down. Take photos. Record conversations, if legal in your state. Keep a paper trail. Memory fades. Proof doesn't. Know your HOA rules. Don't rely on second-hand info or neighborhood gossip. Read your governing documents. Know what's allowed and what's not. Ignorance is Karen's best friend. Don't engage emotionally. People like her feed on reaction. If you stay calm, stay factual, and don't take the bait, you rob them of their favorite weapon, control through chaos. Involve the proper channels, HOA boards, property managers, and, if necessary, attorneys. Don't try to solve it all yourself. There are processes for a reason. Connect with others. Chances are you're not the only one. Strength in numbers matters. A united community is Karen's worst nightmare. In the end, she didn't win. She didn't get to decide who moved into the neighborhood. She didn't get to rewrite the rules. And most importantly, she didn't get to push me out of my own home. What she did get was exposure. Her behavior is now documented, recognized, and addressed. She's no longer operating in silence or power. She's just a neighbor now, one without any real say in how I live. Because the truth is, authority without accountability is just bullying. And the only way to stop a bully is to stand up, speak out, and refuse to back down. Home should be your peace, not your battlefield. And no one, not even a self-appointed gatekeeper, has the right to take that from you. Subscribe to Expose HOA Karen for more real stories and stand up against neighborhood harassment.